what do you say we go really deep right away with a reading from Chögyam Trungpa? The basic problem we seem to be facing is that we are too involved with trying to prove something, which is connected with paranoia and the feeling of poverty. When you are trying to prove or get something, you are not open anymore. You have to check everything. You have to arrange it correctly. It is such a paranoid way to live, and it really does not prove anything. One might set records in terms of numbers and quantities, that we have built the greatest, the biggest, we have collected the most, the longest, the most gigantic. But who is going to remember the record when you are dead, or in 100 years, or in 10 years, or in 10 minutes? The records that count are those of the given moment, of now, whether or not communication and openness are actually taking place now. This is the open way, the bodhisattva path. A bodhisattva would not care even if he received a medal from all the Buddhas proclaiming him the bravest bodhisattva in the entire universe. He would not care at all. You never read stories of the bodhisattvas receiving medals in the sacred writings, and quite rightly so, because there is no need for them to prove anything. The bodhisattva's action is spontaneous. It is the open life, open communication, which does not involve struggle or speed at all. That's from the book Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, and it seems to be pointing in the direction of some insane state of consciousness that you could develop where you're no longer concerned in any way at all with anything other than the exact moment that is happening, and that's where you live. Crazy idea. Whereas most of us are spending every single second completely worried over what this person is going to think about us, whether or not we are going to get the accolades we deserve. Do our friends respect us? I remember hearing a comedian once say, "The most important thing to me was the respect of my peers." Imagine that. That's the most important thing for a lot of people, naturally. The part of your brain that processes rejection is the same part of your brain that processes physical pain. The implication being that there's nothing worse if you're in a tribe than to get excommunicated from the tribe, to get kicked out. I mean, shit. Have you seen that show on Prairie Dogs? I think it's Prairie Dogs. The cute little guys. The guys who sit in their strange burrows and look out. And man, this documentary was so dramatic because one of these prairie dogs got kicked out. He didn't do the right thing. He wasn't being a good enough prairie dog. He failed as a prairie dog and was outcast and sort of sent into the wilderness without the protection of his friends, doomed to wander alone in the great wilderness, and where a prairie dog is a sandwich on legs. So for this prairie dog, it was a very dangerous situation he got in by being a failed prairie dog, or maybe being too much of an individual. And I think that's why everybody secretly feels mortified at the concept of people you know talking about you behind your back, or the negative opinions of people that you know. And many people struggle under this invisible and terrible gravity, the constant, never-ending consideration of how you are perceived by your friends and your family. And if that's where you're at, you can't be in the present moment. You're existing in some kind of other strata of experience. You're existing in a strata of experience where that sort of sits above the present moment, like a callus. That's where you're living. It's a more controllable place. It's terrifying to dabble in the present moment, because the present moment is not the washed out, boring, yawn-inducing, mundane kind of peaceful bullshit that you might imagine it is based on contact you've come into with certain spiritual writings. It's easy to think the present moment is where you go when you get old. You sit and watch the birds and a little rivulet of drool runs down the side of your mouth, and that's the present moment, a kind of numb, bored, yawning state. But the real present moment is something so catastrophic and terrifying and creative all at the same time that most people spend all of their energy desperately trying to avoid even the vaguest contact with it. We're dealing with the part of the universe that is in a constant state of destruction and creation, which is the present moment. Every single moment in time is instantaneously being evaporated, erased, wiped clean. Whatever happened to you 2 minutes ago is gone, devoured by some unknown thing we call time. And the present moment is that point on the conveyor belt where that which is not becomes that which is, and that which is becomes that which is not. It's that place where those two places meet. It's the transcendent place. Kali, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahman, the creator and the destroyer hanging out together at a wonderful picnic, and it's amazing, but it's really terrifying. It really is. When teachers like Jesus Christ are saying things like, "You must die to this world to come to know me." Or when you hear the stories of your friends who had an ayahuasca trip and how they were tortured until the moment they allowed themselves to die, those are scary stories if you're somebody who is clinging to the delusion that there's any kind of permanence, stability, or non-changing aspect to the universe. If you've tricked yourself into thinking that whatever state that you're in right now is going to stay that way, then the concept of the state changing in the most dramatic way possible, which is death, is absolutely horrifying. I know, because I'm one of those people. I hate the idea of dying. It just doesn't appeal to me. It's something that I would like to not have happen. And I think that the movement into the present moment is a form of death. It's the death of all your preconceived notions. It's the death of all of your expectations. It's the death of every single way you thought things were going to be. You give it all up. There's nothing except the thing itself, which, if you're something that's been existing outside the thing itself, pretending that you aren't some eternal, non-embodied singularity, a unitive consciousness that expresses itself temporarily in the form of all known phenomena, then it can be fucking spooky. So it's fun to live outside of that and to build a little nest and to pretend that you're a person with a social security number and a name and a job and a family, and that this dance that you're doing in the physical, material universe will go on forever, which it won't. So that's, I think, why teachers like Chögyam Trungpa, and we talk about this idea a little later in the podcast, will say, if you haven't already started down the path of what is known as awakening or whatever you want to call it, don't go down it. It's better not. Enjoy the dream. It's a fine dream. And there's nothing wrong with just being in that dream of permanence. Nothing wrong with it. It's beautiful. And maybe that's why we're here. But if you're somebody who started waking up to the reality of the situation, which is that everything is a constant state of kaleidoscopic flux, then, well, that's where people like Chögyam Trungpa come in handy, because they can sort of guide you through the process, or at least give you something to read when you've eaten too much marijuana